Video games are great. The industry that makes them is not. And consumers have noticed this over the last decade with the debacle surrounding predatory microtransactions, misleading marketing, obtrusive DRM restrictions, and deliberate termination of features that players already paid for. And there is another, arguably worse side of the games industry that consumers don't get to see, because the suits that run the industry gag the few people that get to see it. This video will show you what they don't want you to see, and if you watch to the end, you will understand why they don't want you seeing this. We're talking about the extremely exploitative contracts forced on developers, the people who actually make the games you play, by the publishers who are supposed to fund its development. Consumers don't usually get to see these contracts, as the publishers who draft them force developers to sign a non-disclosure agreement before they show the developers the actual terms of the contract. They don't want these terms to be public knowledge for a reason. Once the developers have signed the NDA, they cannot reveal whatever terms are presented to them, no matter how horrific the contract is. The developer is bound to silence under pain of ruinous litigation. With that said, a publisher might occasionally forget to force a developer to sign a non-disclosure agreement before the publishing contract is presented, and it is this rare occasion that gives us, the public, a glimpse of what goes on behind the scenes. This is how we acquired the document you're about to see. We have redacted the names of the publisher and game as a precaution, though this might be unnecessary as no NDA was ever signed at any point in this document's journey to us. The publisher that allegedly drafted this document says, "We specialize in helping indie developers deliver their games to multiple platforms by giving teams the support and space they need to achieve their vision." Does the contract allegedly presented to developers hold up to these principles? You be the judge. Developer shall deliver to the publisher one copy of the fully functional Gold Master for the product, in executable object code form, for each platform in electronic format, bug-free. Hold on. What game is bug-free before launch? Does any studio on Earth have the time or personnel to crawl through every inch of the game at every second in the game's timeline to ensure there were no bugs anywhere at any time? Even AAA developers with hundreds of millions of dollars ship games riddled with bugs, even after several delays to their release date. And here, this publisher expects independent developers to manage what the largest studios cannot. This is not conjecture. The publisher's website says it specializes in indie developers. What independent developer has the resources to ensure there won't be a single bug? Because that's what the contract demands. Developer represents and warrants to the publisher that the Gold Master for the product will operate in accordance with commonly accepted standards for operation of such product, will be free from any bugs, significant programming errors or anomalies. What happens if the publisher finds a bug or anomaly? Then it may not qualify as the Gold Master the contract requires of the developer. In the event developer fails to deliver the Gold Master for the product by the Gold Master delivery date, unless such delivery date is extended by a mutual written agreement of the publisher and developer, developer shall be deemed to be in material breach of this agreement. Unless such delivery date is extended by mutual written agreement. All the publisher has to do is not agree in writing, and they will have deemed the developer to be in material breach of the agreement. How likely is the publisher to agree to extend the date? Everything depends on the incentives. Does the incentive to extend the date outweigh the incentive to deem the developer in breach? If they agree to extend the date, the developer gets to ship the game. What incentive does the publisher have to disagree? What does the publisher gain from holding the developer in breach? If the publisher terminates this agreement pursuant to this section, all amounts paid by the publisher in connection with the product shall be fully and immediately refundable. If the publisher chooses not to agree to extend the delivery date, their contract gives them the right to terminate the agreement and demand a refund of all the money they paid to the developer. But wait, there's more. In the event of termination by the publisher prior to the release of the product for a material breach by the developer, the publisher shall have the right to obtain a refund of all unrecouped advances and other reimbursable sums paid by the publisher to the developer hereunder. Unrecouped advances. What's that? Searching the contract for advance points to this clause. The publisher shall have the right to request additional translations, localization of the product by providing notice to the developer. The publisher shall choose the manner, method, and cost of each localization, subject to approval from developer, which approval shall not be unreasonably withheld. Such costs shall be deemed an advance hereunder. Again, who gets to decide who's being unreasonable? The contract does not say. The publisher gets to choose to mandate additional translations and the methods and the cost, as well as deem those costs an advance. Royalties earned hereunder will be accrued quarterly and paid in United States dollars, less all advances and other permitted charges. This lets the publisher reduce the royalties paid to the developer by the so-called advance costs, which the publisher chose. Neither party makes any guarantee of success with respect to revenue to be achieved or royalties to be earned from the product. This would let the publisher hypothetically whittle the royalty down to zero by commissioning extremely expensive translations to a localization company that may or may not be owned by the publisher. Remember, the publisher shall choose the manner, method, and cost of each localization. And that's not the worst of it. If the agreement is terminated by the publisher under Section 13b(1) and 13b(4) above, developer hereby irrevocably assigns all intellectual property rights in and to the product, including any source code and any materials related to the product, to the publisher. How does this correspond with what the publisher's website says? We don't steal souls, and we certainly won't steal your intellectual property. Your IP remains yours. We partner with you on your project for a predetermined amount of time. You receive all of the benefits we offer until that time runs out. We give you the tools you need to succeed, and you retain complete creative freedom and control over your IP. That's just how we roll. Your IP remains yours. Remember, contracts are legally enforced. Vague promises on the website are not. Apparently, the website's promises about developers retaining intellectual property does not apply if the agreement is terminated by the publisher under Section 13b(1) and 13b(4). Section 13b(1) may refer to this clause. In the event of a material breach of this agreement by developer, the publisher shall have the right to suspend the publisher's obligations to make payments to developer and/or offset any royalties or other payments due to developer under this agreement against any sums owed by the developer to the publisher under this agreement until developer has cured such breach. If such breach is not cured within the cure period, the publisher shall have the right to terminate this agreement. Section 13b(4) may refer to this paragraph. Delivery. In the event that developer fails to deliver the product by the Gold Master delivery date, the publisher may make other arrangements, including but not limited to engaging third-party consultants to develop the product. All costs associated therewith shall be fully recoupable at any time from any and all royalties and other sums accruing to developers under this agreement. Upon notice by the publisher of its intention to develop the product in the manner aforesaid, developers shall deliver to the publisher all materials reasonably requested or required by the publisher to do so, including, but not limited to, the source code and the development tools to be used solely in connection with exploiting the product, subject to the publisher's continuing obligation to account for royalties. This section does not talk about termination, and even suggests the publisher has a continuing obligation to account for royalties. Of course, an earlier section has absolved the publisher from any guarantee of success with respect to revenue to be achieved or royalties to be earned from the product. The aforementioned section has given the publisher the right to subtract the cost of additional translation from the royalties to be paid to the developer. All costs associated therewith shall be fully recoupable at any time from any and all royalties and other sums accruing to developer under this agreement. Who determines the cost again? The publisher shall have the right to request additional translations, localization of the product by providing notice to developer. The publisher shall choose the manner, method, and cost of each localization. The contract lets the publisher recoup its chosen cost from the royalties should a developer fail to deliver the product by the Gold Master delivery date. This delivery section would also force the developer to deliver the source code and development tools to the publisher, who could then make other arrangements, including hiring someone else to develop the product. However, their options are not limited to commissioning external development, as this publisher is also a developer and has crowdfunded a game they built themselves. They could easily take over development of the contracted product if they wanted to. This delivery section also lets the publisher deduct the cost of this development from the royalties owed to the developer who signs this contract. Apparently, the publisher may also somehow use this section to terminate the contract and seize all intellectual property rights to the product and its source code. Why would any developer sign this? What does the publisher say it will provide to entice gullible developers? Publishers are supposed to fund the development of the game and handle its marketing. What responsibilities does this contract impose on the publisher? The publisher shall determine the manner and method of publishing, maintaining, marketing, and distributing the product and ancillary products, including, without limitation, marketing plans, expenditures, advertising and promotion, packaging, channels of distribution, press releases, influencer lists, distribution of the product to the publisher platinum members, and the price and release date of the product and ancillary products. That doesn't sound much like responsibilities and more like rights. The publisher shall determine the manner and method of publishing, as well as the price and release date. Publisher shall use commercially reasonable efforts to support developers' development of the product. Of course, the document does not define commercially reasonable. In the absence of a stipulated definition, who gets to determine what is commercially reasonable? Who has the power to interpret this contract and its enforcement? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Publisher shall provide a professionally crafted website for the product, along with the related branding in accordance with developer specifications which have been mutually agreed upon between the parties. Finally, something tangible. Publisher shall develop a launcher patcher for the product that will streamline the process for new content and offer the product users a way to keep their product updated. This is a commitment, though it may not yield a desirable result. PC players have often had to put up with launchers that fail to properly patch their game, if they manage to download it in the first place. Publisher shall use commercially reasonable efforts to promote and market the product. Again, there's that weasel word, commercially reasonable. This word is so common in this contract you'd think it would be defined in the section dedicated to definitions. But nope. Publisher shall use commercially reasonable efforts to run eBlast promotional events in order to increase coverage of the product. Here's another clause that features commercially reasonable. Not surprisingly, the obligations imposed on the developer are not nearly as ambiguous. If developer possesses any collections or lists of user email addresses in connection with the product on the effective date, then developer shall promptly provide such user email information to publisher, and any subsequent user email sign-ups occurring after developer provides such information shall be managed exclusively by publisher. Contrast that with the publisher's next obligation. Publisher will use commercially reasonable efforts to establish connections with new content creators. Hey, it's our old friend, commercially reasonable. Convention showcasing. Publisher shall showcase the product in at least 2 major video game conventions, Gamescom, PAX, C3, etc. Finally, we get to another tangible commitment. This is possibly the only indisputable benefit developers get by signing this contract, as from what we've heard, this publisher didn't offer much, if anything, in the way of funding. We were told that this publisher was unwilling to go past $10,000, saying it was unusual for them to provide any money. It's ironic that their website states, "We'll give you the initial financial push you need to work in peace, if you need the kind of budget that only crowdfunding can provide." If the publisher cannot provide the budget the developer needs, what's the point of signing with that publisher? If the developer would ultimately have to resort to crowdfunding anyway, why would they even subject themselves to these terms? Royalties for net revenue derived throughout the territory from the commercial exploitation of the product and ancillary products shall be paid at the following rates. 1. For sales of the product from Steam, publisher shall pay to developer a royalty of 63%. 2. For sales of the product from consoles, publisher shall pay to developer a royalty of 63%. 3. For sales of the product on the publisher store, publisher shall pay to developer a royalty of 63%, after deducting the 15% the publisher store fee as part of the net revenue calculation. 4. For sales of the product from any other platforms, publisher shall pay to developer a royalty of 63%. Why would any developer give up 37% of the revenue from the sales of their game and possibly their intellectual property in exchange for what? A website? A launcher? Promotion at 2 game conventions? Whatever it is this publisher provides, it apparently does not amount to much financially, as one of the games this publisher uses as an example of its crowdfunding success is a project that asks for $4,800. You cannot provide $4,800 and you have the nerve to call yourself a publisher? You'll be glad to have a publisher who knows a thing or two about blasting through funding goals. They're not kidding. One of the games presented in their crowdfunding section is a title this publisher developed in-house. It's interesting to observe the publisher guaranteeing the game will have no microtransaction or paid DLCs in the Kickstarter page, only to add them later once the game was funded, developed and published. Although at these prices it might be more accurate to call them macro transactions. If they're selling in-game items at $250, why the hell can't they afford to provide the funding their developers need? Why do they need to direct their developers to Kickstarter? Why are they bragging about their own crowdfunding campaign when they purport to be a publisher? What good is a publisher that can't fund its own game? With publishers like these, it's not a mystery why Epic has managed to seduce so many independent developers despite the backlash. If all Epic wants is for the developers to make their games exclusive to Epic Games Store and is willing to fund development, commit to marketing and guarantee revenue on top of only taking a 12% cut, why wouldn't developers hitch their horses to Epic if the alternative is to deal with terms like these? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below.